Today on Straight Talk Africa, the South Sudan peace process collapsed last week. This following an international deadline on March 5th. Observers insist the two principals must set aside their differences and end the conflict. That's coming up next right here on Straight Talk Africa. Hello, welcome to Straight Talk Africa. It's Wednesday, March 11th. I am Shaka Sali.
And hello, Shaka, and hello to all our viewers and listeners on the continent and elsewhere. I'm Mariama Diallo, your social media reporter.
Today, we'll talk about the implications of the stalled South Sudan peace talks in the Ethiopian capital of Addis Ababa.
We have a lot to delve into on today's program. Coming up later in our STA inbox, we'll share some thoughts from our audience who sent in emails, Facebook, and Twitter comments. We'll reveal some of them ahead on Straight Talk Africa.
But first, the people of South Sudan continue to suffer greatly due to the ongoing political turmoil and violence brought about by the government and the rebel group, SPLM, in opposition. My colleague, Paul Cisco, has more. Sorry for the technical difficulties, and now joining us here in our Washington studios are two distinguished guests. Garang Ding Akuong, the South Sudanese ambassador to the United States. I have to say frankly, Ambassador Garang, that I'm profoundly honored and exceedingly humbled to have the opportunity to host you for the first time on Straight Talk Africa.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be on your show and happy to your listeners and viewers.
It's a pleasure. And of course, Johnny Tanza Mabusu, managing editor and host of South Sudan in Focus, the voice of America's 30-minute weekly English language to Africa. It's a pleasure, of course, having you again.
Thank you, Shaka. It's always a pleasure to be on this show.
Well, I gather that we can now go for the package. So the people of South Sudan continue to suffer greatly due to the ongoing political turmoil and violence brought about by the government and the rebel group SPLM in opposition. My colleague Paul Cisco has more.
For many South Sudanese citizens, any signs of hope for peace in the world's youngest nation were again dashed after talks between President Salva Kiir and his longtime rival Riek Machar collapsed in Addis Ababa without a deal. Political discord between the two leaders has brought ethnic violence, and now there appears to be no resolution to the standoff in sight. A leaked African Union document says a transitional government is needed in South Sudan, and that neither Kiir or Machar should serve in it, reportedly because of their alleged responsibility for the, quote, organized massacres and large-scale violence, end quote. South Sudanese rebel leader and former Vice President Riek Machar says the government is not willing to change its position.
We have done our best to arrive to a peace agreement, but it has not become possible because the positions being presented by the government.
President Salva Kiir had little comment.
I have no comment.
Michael McQuay, a spokesperson for the government of South Sudan, denies that the talks were a major setback.
I don't agree with the conclusion that the talks have failed, but we say we are suspending the talks for further consultations.
Sayoum Mesfin is chief mediator for the Intergovernmental Authority on Development.
The level of damage of confidence, the level of mistrust that you see between these leaders is unbelievable. And they have not been able to overcome this, to forgive with each other and execute their people by cutting a deal and an agreement to transform the country into a peaceful one ruled by constitutional rules.
UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon expressed profound disappointment at the talks' conclusion, and the U.S. State Department strongly condemned the lack of political leadership to resolve this man-made conflict. Earlier, the UN Security Council adopted a resolution to impose limited sanctions on South Sudan. U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Samantha Power.
Those who frustrate peace must begin to pay the price.
More peace talks are expected, but no date has been scheduled. Meanwhile, the death toll is mounting. Over 10,000 people have been killed. The UN believes there were 12,000 child soldiers involved in the conflict there last year. Upwards of 2 million people have been displaced, and an estimated 2.5 million South Sudanese are facing severe food shortages. Paul Sisko, VOA News.
Thanks, Paul, for that report. And before we begin our discussion, I am now joined by the former Vice President of South Sudan, Dr. Riek Machar, currently the chairman of the Sudan People's Liberation Movement in opposition. He joins us by telephone link-up from Addis Ababa. Good evening, Dr. Machar.
Good evening, Chaka.
How are you today?
Well, I'm okay. Physically, okay.
I see. Well, you've been fighting for over a year now, Dr. Machar, and there are a lot of people, frankly, who were hoping that you would meet the deadline of the talks, which was last week on Thursday, March 5th. Why didn't you sign on the deal?
Well, there was no agreement to be signed. There was no deal. I'm disappointed like the rest of the South Sudanese people and also the rest of the world. So there was no deal on the table.
Are you suggesting that whatever you were supposed to append your signatures on was not something perhaps that reflected the fundamental root causes of the problems of South Sudan?
You know, from our viewpoint, there are three fundamental issues. The system of governance, we have suggested that we move from the current system to a federal system. On principle, there is agreement, but when we come to details, there is disagreement. As they usually say, the devil is in the details. The second issue is the security arrangements. As you know, the country is split after December 16th. The country is split politically. Even the security organs, the army, national security, the police, and the rest, they are split. Even the public service is split. So we do not see a deal that would correct this, that will give adequate security arrangements for all to be confident of. Number three, you know that the AU has refused to publish its report on the conflict in South Sudan because the commission was formed. The AU has not published or made public this report. Everybody has been asking for it to be made public, and because it would address the issues of accountability, justice, reconciliation, healing, and even institutional reform. All in all, we couldn't agree on these issues of accountability. So there was no deal on the table ready.
I have seen the leaked report of the African Union Commission, of course, which was led by former Nigerian President General Olusegun Obasanjo, retired but certainly not tired. And among other things, actually, it indicates that the report would like to see President Salva Kiir and Dr. Riek Machar stepping aside, not participating in the proposed, for example, transitional arrangement. Have you heard about that?
Yeah, I heard about that. My concern is, what have I done wrong? I am the victim. I am the aggrieved. The person who planned the massacre in Juba is President Salva Kiir. So if his punishment is to ensure that he does not participate in the transitional government of national unity, what is my fault there? I was chased away. The world proved that there was no coup as claimed by the government, and a massacre was committed in Juba by the president using his own troops, and I believe Ambassador Garang knows about it.
To what extent, Dr. Riek, would you say you have confidence in IGAD, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, as a neutral or non-partisan mediator in as far as the talks are concerned?
Well, I don't think that IGAD is non-partisan or neutral. You know that Uganda is part of the talks at the level of the summit, and Uganda is part of the conflict. Is fighting all over South Sudan, starting from Equatoria, Greater Upper Nile now, Greater Bahar Ghazal. It's part of the war, and it is also part of the resolution of the conflict. So you can't describe it as a neutral body. That is IGAD. But we have accepted to negotiate under such a system, yes.
How do you respond to some who will say that peace talks between President Salva Kiir and Dr. Riek Machar really is like a couple planning a political marriage while concentrating on political divorce?
Well, you see, I have told you the fundamental issues which we would like to address, and they are real. One, this is system of governance. We have proposed federalism. They have accepted it in principle, but we differ in the details. We have also said we need to address the security issues by having adequate security arrangements. This is important for all the people in South Sudan. And then the accountability agenda. I think this if we reach an agreement on these three issues and the other procedural issues related to them, we should strike a deal. But we haven't.
Again, looking at the AU Commission leaked report, which obviously has not been released publicly, it would seem that the mediators, in fact, had done their job, and they had actually put out a deal that probably you and a lot of others could have lived with, but apparently the deal was changed by the heads of IGAD. I'm talking about the presidents and the Prime Minister of Ethiopia. Have you heard about that?
Well, you know, one of the difficulties in the IGAD mediation is the complication which comes in when a summit is called. They had called several summits, and we find ourselves negotiating with the heads of the state and government at every summit, and at most of the time, and specifically on the 25th of August, this was the case when even the mediators were sidelined. So we have problems.
So what do you sincerely finally think that must happen in order for you to stop and end the fighting so that the ordinary people of South Sudan, in fact, the vast majority of South Sudanese, can again begin to live their lives in peace and harmony? Dr. Riak.
We want to strike a peace agreement still under this imperfect mediation system, the IGAD, but we know that the talks collapsed, and there was a declaration that this mechanism did not yield fruits, but a new mechanism will be introduced. So we're waiting for the new mechanism so that we can resume the talks.
I see. Well, we're going to have to stop right there. I would like to thank Dr. Riek Machar, chairman of the Sudan People's Liberation Movement in opposition, who joined us on the telephone link-up from Addis Ababa. We will now pause for a short break and would like to remind you that Straight Talk Africa is now on the social networking website Twitter, and we are tweeting live. Follow us at VOA Shaka. That's VOA Shaka, and join in on today's discussion with your questions and comments. Don't forget to use the hashtag VOA South Sudan. And we are still on Facebook. Just enter the keywords Straight Talk Africa. Become a fan and connect with other friends of the Voice of America. We'll be right back with you, so please don't go away.
The conflict in South Sudan started in December 2013 when Salva Kiir, from the ethnic Dinka group, fired then Vice President Riek Machar, an ethnic Noor, and accused him of plotting to overthrow the regime. Machar denied the allegations and accused Kiir of carrying out violent purges. The accusations sparked violence among the two ethnic groups, causing the death of thousands and leaving millions displaced. Several NGOs have accused both warring sides of committing crimes against humanity, including mutilation, rape, and extrajudicial executions. President Kiir has warned that the country is at risk of famine if the violence continues.
As Nigeria heads to the polls March 28th, Voice of America reporters head to the field, covering the election campaigns and the issues for Nigeria and all of Africa. Turn to Voice of America for the facts. Nigeria Decides 2015. What happens there matters throughout Africa. VOA has the largest team of international journalists in Nigeria and surrounding countries, counting down to the March 28th election and beyond. VOA's Nigeria Decides 2015 coverage is on radio with Daybreak Africa, Africa News Tonight, and Nightline Africa. On television with Africa 54 and Straight Talk Africa. And stay on top online. Go to voanews.com. Special Nigeria Decides 2015 coverage is underway now. A commitment to Africa from Voice of America.
This is Straight Talk Africa on the Voice of America. What is your opinion about today's topic? Call us at 202-619-3111. U.S. country code 1. When you call, remember the following. Ask only one question. Keep your comment brief and turn down the volume on your radio or television. Now let's return to Straight Talk Africa.
Thank you very much, Esther Gizui. And today we are talking about the implications of the stalled South Sudan peace talks in Addis Ababa, the seat of the African Union. Our distinguished guests are Garang Akuong, the South Sudanese ambassador to the United States, and John Tanza Mabusu, managing editor and host of South Sudan in Focus, the Voice of America 30-minute weekday English language radio internet broadcast, which airs Monday through Friday at 7:30 p.m. East African time. Once again, my fellow East Africans, you're most welcome to Straight Talk Africa.
Thank you.
You're most welcome. Galang, it's been a very, very long time since You used to follow Straight Talk Africa. How do you feel now that you are on the set yourself?
Lastly, I'm on the program.
Terrific.
I've been a fan of the program since the 90s.
Really?
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I have to say that the feeling is mutual. I'm glad that we could actually have you in the studio. You just heard your compatriot, a former, of course, vice president of your country, talk about how, in fact, there was no deal. Come Thursday, there was no deal worth signing, really. How do you react to that, Mr. Ambassador?
Yeah, thank you very much. My reaction would be that we are all disappointed that there was no deal in Addis Ababa.
Mm-hmm.
But since we are still talking, we are hoping that one day we'll arrive to a deal. But let me also comment on the points raised by Dr. Riek Machar. I and Dr. Riek Machar have been in this government since 2010.
Mm-hmm.
So we know what happened in the government. We know what happened in the time leading to the crisis.
Yes.
Dr. Machar will recall that in March 2013,
mm-hmm.
he and Group 11 called for a meeting
mm-hmm.
in the presidency,
mm-hmm.
where they called the president. He himself was there.
Mm-hmm.
Pagan was there.
Mm-hmm.
Deng Alor was there.
Mm-hmm.
And they called for the president to step down. That was way back before the crisis.
Was that the famous press conference?
Not. I'm coming to that.
Mm-hmm.
That was on 3rd. Not 3rd. That was in March 2013. Then, in that meeting, they called the president to step down, and each one of them expressed his desire and to lead the South.
Yes.
The president told them that he didn't have any problem, but let us go back to our institutions, which are the SPLA, the SPLM, Congress, and then the people of South Sudan. That was the meeting of March. In July the 4th, Dr. Riek Machar gave interview to Reuters, in which, this is the Reuters reporter, the deputy leader of a newly independent South Sudan has issued a veiled warning to the country's Western-backed president, Salva Kiir, telling him to stand down and vowing to replace him before or after the election by 2015.
Right.
This was July, before the crisis.
This is 2013?
This was 2013.
Yeah, we know,
that was the build-up to Dr. Riek coup. Then, in December
15.
Yeah, when the president was in France, himself and others went to SPLM headquarters and called the president by all names.
Right.
He's a dictator,
Right.
he's a failure, and
Right.
all this. Then what do anybody expect from a leader to do?
I hear what you're saying, Mr.
Victoria
Ambassador.
cannot claim that he's innocent when he has been building up for the climax of 2015.
In other words, it really takes two to tango.
Yes.
What do you think about this, John? We obviously cannot deny the fact that some of these things occurred, but what about the fact that perhaps we should in fact compare those things that occurred then to, frankly, the suffering that your cousins, your mothers, your fathers, your aunts are going through?
Well, Shaka, before the conflict developed to what it is right now, it was a disagreement within the political party, the ruling party.
Right.
Dr. Riek and some other members of the party like Pagana Moon.
Were those members of the political bureau?
Yes, the members of the political bureau came up and called for a convention because these are some of the party mechanism for, elections and reforms and democracy within the party. But this party convention was postponed several times. And then Dr. Riek and the rest of the other members of the political bureau reminded President Kiir that it's time for us to have this convention so that we can address some other party issues. And that is where the problem all started. And to come to your question about the suffering of the people, when I was in Addis, I spoke to several stakeholders, civil society groups, faith-based groups, and even the youth. When I asked them, how do people at home feel? And the answer is people are disappointed. They want an end to this fighting because they did not expect independent South Sudan to be an arena of fighting. They wanted to enjoy what they call the freedom that they have been fighting for. They want to enjoy the fruits of the freedom. And so the common sentiment from people at home is that this fighting must end.
How do you respond to some people, frankly, who have been saying that the only reason, for example, why South Sudan is an independent sovereign nation today is largely because at one time you had a uniting factor. You had a uniting factor, Khartoum, because you had, according to these reports, a very, very strong hatred of Khartoum, but that since you separated from Khartoum, there is what they call lack of a vision to change society into a viable democratic entity built on the idea of a common future.
Well, I will agree to some extent with those predictions because what South Sudan went through right after independence is a post-conflict scenario. When a country goes into conflict, after the conflict there are lots of issues that need to be addressed. There are issues of democracy, issues of nation building, issues of human resource, issues of distribution of wealth, and the list is just endless. And so right after independence, the post-conflict scenario was not handled the right way.
Right.
There was a scramble for positions, if you like. Everybody wants to be on the top seat. Everybody is struggling to secure a job in the government. In fact, in South Sudan, the government is the only employer. Most people want to work with the government. But the truth of the matter is, when the people of South Sudan were fighting the long war with Khartoum, of course, there were a lot of things that were swept under the carpet, postponed, if you like. They would say, let us finish with our common enemy first, and then we will come to address these issues. And these issues were prolonged for quite a long time, and that's why it erupted. For instance, it's an open secret that some communities in South Sudan don't coexist peacefully from time immemorial due to the nature of their social and socio-economic activities. For instance, take example of cattle keepers.
Pastoralists.
Yes, they don't see each other eye to eye.
With cultivators.
Yes.
But that's not unique to South Sudan because you have the same dynamics, for example, in Rwanda. You have the same dynamics in Burundi. You have the same dynamics, as a matter of fact, in parts of my country, Uganda.
Yeah, but the issue with South Sudan is there's been lack of institutions of governance that will address your issues. If you steal my property, I can go to court and you should be taken to court. But the courts in South Sudan are compromised. In fact, a lot of analysts are saying the judiciary is partisan. So where do you go? Which court do you go to, bring your cases there in case your animal is stolen? So in the absence of a system, people then take refuge in their community for protection because they think where they are, their brothers and sisters will rally behind them to fight whoever wants to come and attack them or take their property. And that's why the situation of South Sudan is a little bit peculiar.
In fact, some observers have gone to the extent of saying that the only thing that the government in Juba has accomplished so far is basically institutionalizing corruption and impunity. Is that something you'd like to respond to, Mr. Ambassador?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, let me say that the issues you have raised and my friend here has responded to issues of post-independence, as he said, and especially countries that emerged from wars.
Right.
Our independence was not peaceful independence. It came through wars.
Certainly not, yeah.
So there were a lot of infrastructures that were destroyed.
Yes.
Schools were destroyed, roads were destroyed, hospitals were destroyed. So we were trying to rebuild the country.
Can we come a little bit back to that later, because time is not our best ally.
Yeah.
You're tuned into Straight Talk Africa. We'll have more of a discussion in a moment. But first, here is Mariama Jaro. Take it away, Mariama.
Well, thanks, Shaka. Still to come, we'll reveal some of the outstanding and fantastic feedback we've received from our audience through social media from across the African continent. But now, here is our letter of the week. Omunua Okugbo from Abuja in Nigeria writes, many steps can and should be taken to bring peace and prosperity to South Sudan. President Salva Kiir and opposition leader Riek Machar should de-emphasize fame, power, money, and stress the importance of developing South Sudan. The country's officials should now craft a roadmap to development that is acceptable to all ethnic and religious groups in the country. The development of South Sudan is what matters most, and not who occupies the State House. Finally, the African Union should take the initiative and play a mediatory role in South Sudan's peace process.
We are able to touch on things that are important to people on an everyday basis. We hope that our viewers are getting inspired when they watch our show. They're getting a view of the world from a different perspective, things that perhaps are not in their immediate vicinity. Today, I could put in on the show something that is a little different, a little unique, and this gives me that inspiration to come to work.
This is Straight Talk Africa on the Voice of America. Call us now with your questions and comments. The number 202-619-3111. And the U.S. country code is 1. Call direct and we'll call you right back. Remember to keep your questions brief. Now back to Straight Talk Africa.
Thank you very much, Esther Gizu, and welcome back to Straight Talk Africa, live from Washington. Once again, it's time to bring in my colleague and social media reporter, Mariama. Take it away again, Mariama.
Well, thanks, Shaka. Talks to end 15 months of conflict in South Sudan are at a standstill after discussions collapsed last Friday without an agreement, violating a March 5th deadline imposed earlier by mediators. It was the latest blow to peace efforts in the political dispute between President Salva Kiir and his former vice president, Riek Machar. Mediators say they could not persuade either side to make a meaningful compromise. Well, this leads us to our question of the week, asking what steps can be taken to end the continuous rivalry between President Salva Kiir and former vice president and rebel leader Riek Machar. Well, first of all, thank you all for using our social media platforms to give us your thoughts. Let's begin with a comment from Michael Babu Duki from Kampala, Uganda, who writes, the rivalry between President Salva Kiir and Riek Machar is just one of the latest manifestations of political greed by African leaders. The only real solution is for the two principals to exit the political stage in South Sudan and allow more citizen-leaning and development-oriented leaders to take the lead and move Africa's youngest nation forward. Well, another reminder that we are tweeting live today. Use the hashtag VOA South Sudan. And if you haven't yet, please follow us on Twitter. And speaking of it, let's go to a tweet from Achek Ibn Umar, who writes, Number 1, restore hope. Bold, painful, unilateral concessions by Kiir and Machar. And number 2, appoint a high-profile personality as sole mediator. Well, let's look at another tweet from Lawrence Swider, who asked, what is the current thinking about how to resolve the tensions over the disputed oil-rich region of Abyei? Well, Shaka, Your Excellency, and my colleague John Tanza, you have the floor.
Well, what about that, Mr. Ambassador? Your reaction?
Yeah, thank you very much. I was saying that the government has accomplished a lot of things during this period, between 2010 and up to this moment.
Right.
First of all, the government of the President Salva Kiir has done a lot of things through difficult times. First of all, it was issue of the CPA implementation.
Right, the Comprehensive Peace Agreement.
Yes, and he has led us through that period. He has supervised over the CPA implementation. He has achieved the referendum. He has achieved the independence. These are things that goals that we set during that time and we've achieved. We have opened the schools, we have built hospitals, we have opened roads. These are things that we have achieved. Corruption is there everywhere in this world. And the government is doing its best to minimize corruption. It has been an issue, and we have established an institution that deals with corruption. There is an institution for that. In the Constitution, we have addressed that.
The institutions might be there on paper, but in practice, do they in fact have the teeth that can bite?
Yeah, they've been given teeth in the new Constitution that they can sue. They can arrest, they can sue. Yeah, and they've been empowered by the Constitution.
I see.
That is something that we have done. So we need to fight it as a government and as a community.
I hear you. Yeah. Mariama, do you have any more feedback to share with the audience, please?
Absolutely. We'll move on to a posting from Joseph Makale in Lusaka, Zambia, who writes, the solution to this kind of hostility lies in the ability of President Salva Kiir and Riek Machar to find peace in their hearts and room to forgive and tolerate each other. They must find space for compromise for the sake of their people. Well, let's look at another comment, this time from Mohamed Ahmed Mansour from Monrovia in Liberia, who says, only the people of South Sudan can stop the suffering of their people. Nobody else can do that. President Salva Kiir and Riek Machar should both cultivate a sense of compassion so they can come together and reconcile their differences. Both sides should stop the fighting and return to peaceful dialogue. Well, Shaka, a wide range of opinions here. But nevertheless compassionate to the South Sudanese people in general. And I think the earlier question had to do with the Abyei situation, that they wanted to find out what happened to that.
Very interesting, very interesting. Thank you very much, Mariama, for bringing us this week's audience reaction. Yeah, what about what you just heard, for example, John, especially the ambassador has, in fact, a reference to the CPA. There's no question that President Salva Kiir has been able to steer the country through the period of CPA, which was 2005 up to, was it 2011 when you got your independence, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, but what about the fact that when you read again the African Union Commission leaked report, it finds a lot of problems, in fact, with the CPA. It says the CPA, which of course is a brainchild really of the IGAD, countries and the Troika.
Yes.
The United States, the United Kingdom and Norway. That in fact it was faulty because it legitimized any group, for example, that had a gun and also introduced what they characterize as the rule of the gun, as opposed to the rule of law.
The CPA had its own, shortfalls. A lot of commentators, political observers have said several times that the CPA was a negotiation between the SPLM and the National Congress Party, that's the ruling party in Sudan. The other political forces in South Sudan were sidelined. And so when SPLA got the legitimacy through the CPA to be the ruling party in South Sudan, it came with a lot of other problems. For instance, the SPLA came when they assumed power, they took over the parliament. 99% was SPLM. And so decisions of the parliament were based on party line as opposed to the interests of the country. And a lot of other political parties were making noise, but their efforts were not heard that much. For instance, Dr. Lama Kol got frustrated, and he formed his own party because he said, we cannot run the country like this. This is not what we fought for.
That is
now,
interesting because Lama
to...
Kol, of course, you should make reference to the fact that he was, in fact, the Sudanese Foreign Affairs Minister during the CPA, correct?
Indeed, he was.
Part of it.
But when he came to Juba, and he started making noise about certain issues that he sees not going right, and he formed his own party called the SPLM DC, SPLM Democratic Change.
Democratic Change.
Yes. Now,
democracy without Democrats.
Well, I will not comment on that. But let me come back to what His Excellency, the Ambassador...
President Salva Kiir, I remember interviewing him, in fact, in Pretoria, in the Pretoria Sheraton, and when I raised the issue of Lama Kol saying that the SPLM was undemocratic, he shot back to me and said, Shaka, between me and Lama Kol, who is a Shuluk prince, who is more democratic than the other?
Yeah, I think the issue of CPA was to reference the league report. CPA was achieved through the barrel of guns.
Yes.
And the issue of the guns that they referred to,
yes,
the guns were there to protect the CPA.
Yes.
Otherwise, we would have not arrived at the point that we had the referendum.
Correct.
So, is Sudan better now without cells? Or if we go back to Sudan, will we be much better? Or will Sudan be better? I don't think so. So this is the issue. The issue of the SPLM domination of the parliament. We had elections where everybody participated, and actually Lama Kol formed his democratic forum before the elections, and he came to the elections and he won 4 seats in parliament. He's now having his opposition party now in parliament.
We'll come to that issue because
decision at the parliament will arrive by parliament because of democratic process. Parliament is representative of the people.
We'll come back to that later because Lama Kol, of course, will tell you that what you call elections, in his view, are perhaps selections.
But he participated and he won 4 seats.
We'll come back to that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mariama, for bringing us this week's audience reaction.
Well, that will do it for today's social media segment. Thanks to our guests for chipping in. I hope they'll be able to address the audience's concerns and clarify certain things about the current situation. And one more thanks to Your Excellency, of course, the newest South Sudanese ambassador to the United States, whom I had the pleasure of sitting down and doing an interview with last week before the March 5th mediation deadline. Well, just a reminder that we appreciate all the feedback, whether it's in social media form or using other means to communicate to us. Please, please keep them coming. And if you are a new fan, just drop us a line at africatv@voanews.com. Once again, our email address is africatv@voanews.com. Or post your comment on our Facebook page. Just enter the keywords Straight Talk Africa. Be sure to visit us online at voaafrica.com, or you can join our YouTube channel. Just subscribe to VOA TV to Africa. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter at VOA Shaka. Now, let's take a look at what's on tap for next week's program. Next week on Straight Talk Africa, land reform. Despite the end of colonialism rule and apartheid, vast amounts of land in Zimbabwe and South Africa and other regions on the continent are not being redistributed fairly and efficiently. We'll discuss this issue and more next week, right here on Straight Talk Africa.
Welcome back. We're talking about the implications of the stalled South Sudan peace talks in the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa. Garang Ding Akuong, the South Sudanese ambassador to the United States, and John Tanza Mabusu, managing editor and host of Voice of America's South Sudan in Focus. Well, I have to say that Garang and John, once again, I'm profoundly honored and exceedingly humbled to have the opportunity to host the two of you on Straight Talk Africa.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chaka.
You're most welcome, sirs. Well, we're talking again about the CPA, we're talking about democracy, all I call it in South Sudan. Of course, democracy is a process. It's neither an incident nor an event. So we can give you the benefit of the doubt. But what about some who say, frankly, that when you look at these peace talks that have been going on, that perhaps you can't expect what someone has characterized as a quick fix of power sharing agreement, really, because it simply doesn't work. Because this person, in fact, says, when you look at the chemistry between the two principals, that there is really no chemistry. That they have sat in rooms and stuff like that, but they spend a lot of time trying to avoid each other, really. You've been to Addis Ababa.
Yes, I came from Addis 4 days ago. And I have seen that. I've seen a bit of that. But when I spoke to delegates from the two groups, I asked one question. When President Kiir and Rebel leader Riek Machar are sitting face to face there, do they talk to each other? They told me no, when they are there, it's normal. They talk to each other, they make jokes. But when it comes to the issues that brought them together, they don't see each other eye to eye.
They don't.
They don't see each other eye to eye because you see, there is a compatible goal that these two leaders are striving to achieve.
Which
and
is?
It is the seat.
The seat, the presidency.
The presidency.
But what about perhaps they perceive the pressure from their supporters, really?
Well, what I saw in Addis was that most of these delegates who came from the two sides have no power to decide. They have to wait for the principals to look at their recommendations and pass it.
I see.
So if there is pressure from the supporters, then these supporters ought to have been given the powers to really, make a final conclusion. And
I hate to disappoint you, my colleague John, because time happens not to be our best ally right now. A reminder that you are tuned into Straight Talk Africa. To participate in our discussion, please call us at 202-619-3111. US country code is 1. We'll continue our discussion in a moment, so please don't go away.
Nearly $2 billion are needed to assist the conflict victims and refugees. 4 million people are at risk of famine. Between 1.1 and 1.5 million people have been displaced. Almost 117,000 South Sudanese refugees have fled to Uganda since December. Nearly 102,000, or 87% of the refugees, are women and children. The International Crisis Group estimates that at least 50,000 people have been killed during the conflict.
Nigeria heads to the polls March 28th for a landmark election. What happens there matters throughout Africa. Turn to Voice of America for the facts. VOA reporters are in Nigeria and surrounding countries covering the campaigns and the issues and counting down to the March 28th election.